No one noticed the
No,
old man
I
until
don't
he
want it.
refused the
Please.
injection, and when he asked why the medicine had no label, the hallway went silent. The nurse
You will pay
hesitated,
for this!
the donor's son
Look what
lost
you
his
did!
temper, and the
Please
patient
stop,
fell
I'm
to the
sorry.
floor
No,
before
stop.
anyone could explain what
Please.
was happening. That should have been the end of it, just another forgotten moment in a busy hospital. But someone was watching, someone who knew that when records are
Keep close,
changed after
boy.
treatment
Stop
and
them.
shipments leave at
They're
night,
right behind us.
it is
Go,
never
go,
just a
go,
mistake.
go.
And before the fire burned the warehouse, before the arrests, before anyone said the word justice,
You stay away from
it
me.
all began
Get out
with
of my
one
way.
quiet
Not
question
happening.
that no
Not
one
happening.
wanted to answer.
Stand down.
Silver Bay woke under low gray clouds, wind carrying the smell of salt through narrow streets near the harbor. On a small rise above the docks stood Harbor Light Recovery Center, a pale concrete building facing the sea, quiet and orderly, built to promise safety to those whose bodies had grown tired long before their spirits were ready. Inside, the corridors were warm and bright, filled with the soft sounds of carts and careful footsteps. Caleb Hartman moved through them with steady, unhurried steps. He was 36, tall and broad-shouldered, dark brown hair cut short, eyes always alert even when his face remained calm. In his Navy security uniform, he looked ordinary, but his posture carried the discipline of someone trained to notice what others missed. Officially, he was just another guard on rotation. In truth, he was placed here to quietly observe irregular supply activity tied to medical facilities along the coast. At his side walked Briggs, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle across his back and deep tan fur along his legs. His amber eyes followed movement without rest, ears lifting at every shift of sound. He did not pull at the leash or bark in the halls. He stayed close to Caleb's leg, moving when Caleb moved, stopping when Caleb stopped, calm but never careless. Patients often smiled when they saw him, and Briggs accepted gentle hands without breaking focus. Most of Harbor Light's patients were older men and women who had spent their lives working with their bodies. One of them was Walter Finch, 64, thin and slightly bent at the shoulders, white hair that refused to lie flat, hands that trembled when fatigue caught him. He had worked the docks since he was a teenager, lifting crates in every kind of weather until his lungs weakened and his back stiffened into constant pain. He spoke softly, thanked people too often, and avoided conflict whenever he could. That morning, Caleb noticed Walter standing near the far end of the main corridor, shoulders tight, hands clasped in front of him. A young nurse stood beside a medication cart, her name tag reading Claire. She was slim with light brown hair in a rushed ponytail and red-framed glasses sliding down her nose when she grew nervous. She spoke in a quiet, rehearsed voice. "It's part of your treatment plan, Mr. Finch. We just need to stay on schedule." Walter shook his head slowly. "I didn't feel right after the last one. I got dizzy. I just want to talk to the doctor first." Claire glanced down the hallway, then back at the syringe in her hand. "I really can't change this without approval." Before Caleb could reach them, Logan Whitmore stepped into the corridor. He was in his early 30s, tall, broad, blonde hair carefully styled, wearing an expensive gray coat that did not belong in a recovery ward. His movements carried easy confidence, the kind learned by people who were rarely told no. As the son of Grant Whitmore, one of Harbor Light's largest donors, he walked through the building like it was partly his. Logan took one look at the situation and stepped between Walter and the nurse. "What's the problem here?" he said, voice sharp but smooth. Walter spoke quietly. "I just want to see the doctor first." Logan sighed as if inconvenienced. "People are trying to help you, and you're holding everything up." Claire lowered her eyes to her clipboard and said nothing. Above them, the corridor camera remained dark, marked with a small red sticker for maintenance. Logan glanced at it briefly, then leaned closer to Walter. "You don't get to pick and choose how this works." When he shoved Walter, it was fast and careless, just enough to send him stumbling back into the railing. Walter hit the wall with a small gasp, surprise more than pain written across his face. The corridor fell silent. No one moved. It was the kind of pause that waited to see which rules would matter. Caleb stepped forward and placed himself between Logan and Walter. His voice was low and even. "That's enough. He has the right to refuse." Briggs moved with him, stopping at Caleb's leg, head level, eyes locked on Logan's hands. Logan laughed quietly. "You think policies apply to everyone the same way?" Caleb did not raise his voice. "Step back." Logan took a half step forward, testing. Briggs shifted his weight, not growling, not baring teeth, simply making the next move look unwise. Logan hesitated, then straightened his coat. "Fine, but don't be surprised when people get tired of problems." He turned and walked away, anger hidden behind practiced calm. Claire rushed to Walter's side. "Are you hurt?" Walter shook his head quickly. No, I'm fine. I don't want trouble." Caleb knelt in front of him. "You didn't do anything wrong. If you feel unwell, you ask to see a doctor. That's your right." Walter nodded, though fear still lingered in his eyes. As Claire guided him back toward his room, Caleb looked up at the dark camera dome, the red sticker bright against the ceiling. He had expected quiet financial misconduct, subtle problems hidden in paperwork. What he had just seen was something different. It was fear used as control and medicine used as pressure. Briggs pressed lightly against his leg. Caleb rested a hand on the dog's head, then continued his patrol. Patients smiled as he passed, staff hurried by with tired eyes, and the building returned to its careful routine. But the calm now felt thin, stretched over something that did not want to stay hidden. As Caleb walked, he kept thinking of how quickly Walter's quiet no had been answered with force. Whatever Harbor Light was hiding, it was not just about money. It was already touching people. And once that happened, it never stopped at one. The ward slowed after noon, voices dropping, carts rolling softer across the floor. Marianne Cole moved between rooms with quick, efficient steps. She was 38, tall and slim, ash-blonde hair twisted into a tight knot, gray eyes sharp even when her face looked calm. Patients trusted her because she never rushed them. Staff trusted her because she never panicked. What few knew was that years earlier she had lost a younger sister to a medication mistake that disappeared behind formal language and closed meetings. Since then, Marianne trusted patterns more than reassurance. She entered the medication room and closed the door behind her. Shelves were lined with identical boxes, labels neat, everything looking exactly how it should. She checked the cart log, then the cabinet stock. Her fingers paused. She checked again. Some vials were missing too quickly. Others had not moved when they should have. Not dramatic, not loud. Just wrong. She slipped 2 vials into a sample bag and wrote the lot numbers on a scrap of paper. Then she locked the cabinet and left as if nothing had happened. She found Caleb near the service stairs. He was speaking with a maintenance worker about a loose light fixture. When the worker left, Marianne spoke fast and low. "Something's off with the meds. Inventory doesn't match usage. Same symptoms showing up in different patients." Caleb listened, eyes steady. "Lot numbers?" She handed him the paper. He copied them into a small notebook and closed it. "Keep watching, quietly." Briggs lay at his feet, head lifted, ears turning at every sound. When Marianne glanced at the dog, she gave a small, tired smile. "I'm glad he was there earlier," she said. Caleb nodded once. An hour later, Marianne was called to prepare transfer paperwork for Walter Finch. The request came from Peter Hollis, a supervisor with thinning hair and careful manners, always polite, never curious. "Room 12, immediate transfer," he said, already turning back to his computer. Marianne's chest tightened. Walter sat on the edge of his bed when she arrived, a small duffel bag at his feet, clothes folded inside. "They said I'm going somewhere else," he said quietly. "Just for tests." "Did they tell you where?" He shook his head. "Did they call your niece?" "No, ma'am." Marianne checked the chart. No physician signature, no family notification, no medical justification listed. She went back to the desk. "The paperwork isn't complete," she said. Peter did not look up. "It'll be filed later. Orders came from upstairs." "That's not procedure." He finally met her eyes, just long enough to make the message clear. "It's not your decision." Marianne returned to Walter's room and helped him with his coat. "I'll walk you down," she said. Walter nodded, grateful and confused at the same time. Outside, a white transport van waited at the curb. The driver was heavy-set, gray-bearded, eyes dull with long hours and short patience. He flicked his cigarette away and opened the door without speaking. Marianne watched as Walter climbed in, still clutching his bag with both hands. "Call me when you get settled," she said, slipping a note with the ward number into his pocket. The door closed. The van drove off. From the far side of the lot, Caleb watched the license plate until it disappeared. When Marianne came back inside, she found him by the elevator. "No family notice. No doctor sign-off," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They moved him fast." "Too fast." "That usually means someone doesn't want questions." The next morning, Walter's name was gone from the board. His room already had another patient. When Marianne checked the medication logs, she saw edits after midnight. Subtle ones, just enough to smooth out the numbers. She printed the logs and slid them into a folder marked Routine Reports. Caleb spent the morning near the back entrance, watching delivery schedules. One truck arrived early. Another left late. Neither showed full unloading records. He sent a short update through secure channels. The reply came back cold and simple. Not enough yet. That afternoon, Marianne met him again in the supply room. Logs were changed overnight, she said, handing him the papers. Caleb compared them with the lot numbers in his notebook. The pattern was there. Not proof, but not coincidence either. "The drug is listed as a supplement," he said. "That doesn't match what I'm seeing," Marianne replied. "Those reactions aren't from vitamins." They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding the same thing. Someone was testing something, and when a patient started asking questions, that patient was removed. "What do we do?" Marianne asked. "We need something they can't erase," Caleb said. "Paper and servers disappear. Trucks don't." "I can flag what leaves without proper records," she said, "and I'll follow where it goes." Fear moved quietly through Marianne's chest, but she nodded anyway. She had lived once with not knowing what had really happened to someone she loved. She would not do that again. As she left, she glanced back at Briggs lying near the door, calm, watchful, ready. "I hope you won't need to work too hard," she said softly. Briggs did not move, but his tail brushed the floor once. Caleb looked down at the documents in his hands, numbers that refused to match, a patient who vanished without explanation, a donor's son who acted like rules were optional. The quiet part was over. Now the trail was moving. The message reached Marianne early, brief and carefully polite, asking her to report to administration before her shift began. She read it once, slipped her phone into her pocket, and kept walking. Marianne Cole was 38, tall and slim, ash-blonde hair tied into a tight knot, gray eyes calm even when her thoughts were not. Years in hospitals had taught her that fear invited pressure, and she refused to give anyone that advantage. The office upstairs was small and quiet. Peter Hollis sat behind the desk, hands folded, tie straight, eyes careful. Beside him stood a woman Marianne did not know, tall and narrow, dark hair cut short, posture rigid, voice precise. They spoke in turns, listing procedural violations in language shaped for reports, unauthorized retention of medication samples, accessing records outside assigned duties, disruption to workflow. The words sounded reasonable. The timing did not. "I acted for patient safety," Marianne said. The woman answered calmly, "Patient safety depends on following procedure." Peter added softly, "This is a temporary suspension, pending review." Marianne heard what the words meant. Temporary meant silence. Review meant obedience. She placed her badge on the desk, nodded once, and left without arguing. Downstairs, the ward moved as if nothing had happened. Call lights blinked, carts rolled. No one announced her removal, but eyes followed her as she cleared out her locker. She slipped papers into her bag, fast and careful. A young nurse named Tessa stood nearby, small, dark curls slipping from her cap, worry plain on her face. "They're sending you home?" Tessa whispered. "For now," Marianne said. "I'm sorry." Marianne gave a brief smile. "Just keep doing your job." She walked out, the doors closing softly behind her. Caleb received his reassignment before noon. A supervisor stopped him near the corridor junction and spoke in the tone used for schedule updates. Interior camera corridors were being reassigned. External access points were now his responsibility. "Any reason?" Caleb asked. "Staffing needs," the supervisor replied, already turning away. Caleb did not argue. Camera corridors were where patterns lived. Back entrances were where movement happened without witnesses. The change was quiet, but it was not accidental. Briggs stayed close to his leg, ears turning at every sound, sensing the shift in Caleb's posture. That night, after visiting hours ended, the service wing grew quiet. Lights dimmed, doors locked. Only a few staff passed through the back halls. Caleb stood near the loading area, checking gate logs, pretending not to watch. Briggs lay beside him, head lifted, breathing slow and steady. Then Briggs rose, his nose lifted, ears forward, body angled toward the service doors. Two workers pushed a cart into the bay, both keeping their eyes down. The cart carried sealed gray containers, not marked for waste or laundry. Briggs stepped forward, tracking the unfamiliar scent, tail still, muscles tight. Caleb did not move. The cart was loaded into a small box truck, waiting with its engine running. No clipboard, no signatures. The doors shut and the truck pulled away. Briggs strained slightly toward the exit, eyes fixed on the open road. Caleb held him back and followed Briggs's gaze instead. The truck turned onto the coastal route, heading toward the industrial stretch near the harbor, disappearing beyond the line of warehouses and cranes that marked the edge of the port district. Caleb memorized the direction. He did not follow, not yet. Back at Harbor Light, he filed a routine report that said nothing about carts or trucks. He did not have proof, only movement, only direction. But that was enough for now. Supplies were leaving the center at night, and they were moving toward the docks. The next night, Caleb did not stop at the edge of the industrial district. He waited until the shift change thinned the traffic, then followed the coastal route that Briggs had marked the night before. The harbor rose out of the dark in layers of metal and shadow, cranes standing like rusted skeletons against low clouds, their long arms frozen above stacks of containers. The air smelled of diesel, salt, and cold steel. Caleb parked where broken pavement met weeds and walked the rest of the way, keeping to the darker edges of the road. Briggs moved at his side, head low, eyes bright, tracking every sound with quiet precision. Ahead, a chain-link fence enclosed a cluster of buildings near the water. One of them was a squat, windowless structure with heavy doors and cooling units humming along its roof. Frost clung to the metal around the vents, despite the mild night. A cold storage warehouse built to keep things preserved long after they should have been moved. Caleb watched the gate from behind a stack of pallets, counting trucks, counting minutes. He did not rush. He never rushed when learning a place. A box truck rolled in and stopped near the side entrance. Two men unloaded sealed gray containers onto a metal cart. One was tall and thin, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller, hair dark and unkempt, eyes always moving. The other was broader, heavier through the chest, moving with the slow confidence of someone who had done this job too many times to worry about being seen. They spoke little, only short words meant to move things along. Briggs's ears lifted when the containers passed, nose catching the same chemical note he had followed before. Caleb held him steady, hand firm but calm on the leash. Inside the fence, a man stepped out of the warehouse to sign a clipboard. He was in his 40s, stocky, beard trimmed close, wearing a thick jacket despite the humming chill of the building. His movements were efficient, not rushed, as if late-night deliveries were part of his normal routine. He glanced at the containers, then back at the driver, and the cart was rolled inside. The door closed. The truck left. The pattern repeated with another vehicle, then another. No sirens, no lights, just quiet exchange. Caleb did not approach the fence. Not yet. He needed timing, not confrontation. He memorized faces, counted shipments, and watched which doors opened and which stayed shut. When the flow slowed, he and Briggs slipped away the same way they had come, leaving nothing behind but cold footprints that the harbor wind would erase. Across town, Marianne sat at her kitchen table under a single warm lamp, papers spread in neat rows. Without her badge, she moved like a guest in her own life, still waking at hospital hours, still thinking in schedules and shifts. She had returned to Harbor Light earlier that day to request copies of patient records under the pretense of preparing a report for review. No one had refused her outright. They simply delayed, redirected, asked her to come back later. So she worked with what she already had. She focused on charts from the same ward where Walter had stayed, tracing medication schedules, checking dosage notes against earlier entries. Marianne's eyes were trained for small differences. A decimal shifted, a time changed by an hour, a signature that no longer matched the hand that had written it before. She saw patterns where others saw paperwork. Several records showed medication levels that had been altered after administration, corrected to align with standard dosages that did not match what had been ordered. Not random errors, adjustments. Her phone buzzed with a message from a former colleague, an older nurse named Linda Barrett, who had once mentored her through her first months on the ward. Linda was short, broad-shouldered, with gray hair she kept in a bun, and a voice that carried comfort and command in equal measure. She had stayed in nursing longer than most because she believed experience mattered, and she still believed the system could be better if enough people refused to let it drift. Linda wrote that pharmacy logs had been accessed overnight by someone using an administrative account not tied to any active shift. Marianne stared at the screen, then wrote back asking for the access times. The reply came quickly, just after midnight, the same window when shipments left the building. Marianne leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. It was no longer just about suspicious medication. It was about someone rewriting reality after the fact. She gathered the charts into a folder and left her apartment, pulling on a jacket as she went. She and Caleb had agreed to meet near the waterfront, where noise and movement made conversations easier to hide. When she arrived, he was already there, standing near a railing that overlooked dark water, Briggs sitting at his side like a statue carved from shadow and light. "They're changing dosages in the records," Marianne said without greeting. "After the meds are given." Caleb nodded. "They're moving shipments through a cold storage warehouse near the docks, multiple deliveries, same containers." She told him about the pharmacy access logs, about the administrative account used in the middle of the night. He told her about the warehouse, the men, the sealed doors. Neither interrupted the other. The pieces fit too cleanly to ignore. "So the system is cleaning itself," Marianne said quietly. fixing the numbers after the damage is done. And the supplies don't stay at the hospital long enough to trace, Caleb replied. They stood in silence, listening to water slap against the pier. If we report this now, Marianne said, it disappears into internal review, or they make us look mistaken, or unstable. Caleb did not argue. He had seen that strategy work in other places, other institutions that survived by exhausting anyone who asked for proof. We gather our own, he said, things they can't rewrite. Marianne nodded. Physical movement, actual containers, and medical confirmation that those dosages were changed. I can map the delivery times, Caleb said, routes, frequency. And I can cross-check every patient who received those batches, Marianne said. Symptoms, vitals, anything that lines up. Briggs lifted his head at the shift in their voices, sensing the decision settle between them. He rose and pressed briefly against Caleb's leg, grounding, steady. They did not talk about risk. Both understood it. Caleb walked Marianne back to her car and watched until her headlights disappeared down the street. Then he returned to the harbor edge and looked out over the cranes, dark against the clouds. He knew now where the trail led. Not all the way, but far enough to know it was not safe to follow through official channels. The next step would not be easy, but it would be theirs. The official letter arrived at Marianne's apartment just after noon, slipped under the door in a plain white envelope with the hospital logo printed neatly in the corner. She stood holding it for a long moment before opening it, already knowing what it would say. The words were formal, distant, and final. Her suspension was now extended, effective immediately, pending further investigation, with access to all internal systems revoked. No mention of patient safety. No mention of the irregularities she had reported. Only procedure, policy, and compliance. Marianne sat at the small kitchen table and read the letter twice, not because she needed to, but because some part of her still hoped to find a line that acknowledged what she had tried to prevent. There was none. She folded the paper carefully and set it aside, hands steady, jaw tight. Losing access meant losing the ability to quietly collect more records. Whatever proof she would help gather from now on would have to come from what she already knew and what she could observe from the outside. Across town, Caleb was called into a meeting near the end of his shift. The security office was narrow, walls lined with monitors that now showed areas he no longer patrolled. His supervisor stood near the desk, posture stiff, eyes tired. Beside him sat a man Caleb had not seen before, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, clean suit, no badge in sight, the kind of person who did not introduce himself unless he needed something. "We've had concerns," the supervisor said, "about boundary issues, independent actions." The man in the suit spoke next, voice calm, practiced. "Your contract is under review. There may be liability concerns." Caleb said nothing. The man leaned back slightly, studying him. "You have experience beyond standard security training." Caleb met his gaze. "I have experience doing my job." The supervisor cleared his throat. "We may need to end your assignment here, effective soon." Caleb nodded once. He had expected this. Watching patterns always drew attention, and attention was what powerful systems removed first. When he left the office, he felt the shift in the building. Doors closed faster. Conversation stopped when he approached. Briggs stayed close, sensing the change, staying alert without being tense. That evening, Caleb's phone buzzed with a secure message that did not come from the hospital system. "Stand by. We need to talk." He left Harbor Light before dark and drove to a quiet stretch near the old rail yard, where rusted tracks cut through tall grass and abandoned sheds. Marianne was already there, sitting on the hood of her car, jacket pulled tight against the wind, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes tired but focused. "They made it official," she said before he could speak. I'm locked out of everything." "They're reviewing my contract," Caleb replied, "which means I'm done here soon." Neither of them looked surprised. A second car pulled in and stopped a short distance away. A woman stepped out, early 40s, average height, dark hair cut just above her shoulders, eyes sharp and steady. She wore jeans and a plain jacket, nothing that suggested authority, but the way she stood carried quiet confidence. Her name was Rachel Pierce. She had spent most of her career following paper trails that led through companies and hospitals that preferred not to be noticed. She trusted facts, not promises, and had learned to be patient where others rushed. "Caleb," she said, nodding. "Marianne." Marianne studied her cautiously. "You're the federal contact." Rachel inclined her head. "Part of the team looking into coastal medical supply contracts. Your situation just moved higher on our list." Caleb crossed his arms. "They're cutting us off before we can get proof." "That's what they do," Rachel said, "which is why we need something they can't explain away." Marianne felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "What kind of proof?" "Physical evidence," Rachel replied. "Containers, labels, transport records, and medical confirmation that what's inside those containers is not what the paperwork says." Caleb thought of the warehouse, the sealed doors, the way the trucks moved without signatures. "We know where shipments are going," he said, "but not what happens after they arrive." Rachel looked at him closely. "That's where you come in." Marianne turned to Caleb. "You told me you were on a quiet assignment. You didn't say you were military?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Former, and working with federal investigators now." She absorbed that, then nodded. "Then we stop pretending this is just hospital politics." Rachel met Marianne's eyes. "If we move too early, they bury this under compliance reviews. If we wait too long, more patients get exposed. We need something solid enough to justify warrants." Marianne's voice was steady. "I can identify which patients received those altered doses and which shipment batches were used. I know how the system is supposed to work and how they're bending it." Caleb added, "I can confirm delivery times and routes, and I can get close enough to verify what kind of storage they're using." Rachel nodded. "That's what we need. Something that ties the medication to off-site handling that doesn't match any legal protocol." Wind moved through the tall grass around them, carrying the smell of rust and cold earth. For a moment, none of them spoke. "You understand what this costs," Rachel said finally. "Your jobs are already gone. Once we move forward, there's no quiet way back in." Marianne did not hesitate. They were using patience. That already crossed the line. Caleb felt Briggs shift at his side, pressing briefly against his leg. He rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself before speaking. "Tell us what you need." Rachel outlined it simply. Times, photos if possible, container markings, any serial numbers, proof that medical goods were being moved outside regulated channels and that patient records were being altered to hide it. Marianne said, "I still have copies of the original charts." "That helps," Rachel replied, "but it won't be enough without physical confirmation." Caleb nodded. "Then that's where I start." Rachel gave him a hard look. "You don't act alone. You observe, you document, you stay alive." Caleb allowed a faint smile. "That's always been the plan." They agreed on a window of time. The next few nights would be critical before hospital administration formally ended Caleb's contract and before internal reviews could finish rewriting the story. When Rachel drove away, Marianne let out a slow breath she had been holding. So, this is what it looks like when the truth gets expensive. Caleb looked toward the dark outline of the harbor in the distance. It always costs something. The question is, who pays? They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision settling in. "We need to be careful," Marianne said. "They already tried to remove us quietly." Caleb nodded. "Which means they're nervous." Briggs lifted his head, ears turning as if agreeing. When they finally parted, each returning to a life that no longer felt stable, both understood the same thing. They were no longer protected by roles or titles, only by what they could prove. And until they had that proof, they were on their own. The call came just before midnight, a single word from Rachel Pierce that made Caleb move before his thoughts fully caught up. Burn. No explanation, no warning beyond that. He was already pulling on his jacket when he read it, Briggs rising from the floor the instant he felt the shift in Caleb's breathing, muscles ready, eyes sharp in the dim apartment light. They drove toward the harbor through streets washed thin by mist, sodium lamps smearing gold across wet asphalt. The port district was never truly quiet, but this hour belonged to machines and men who preferred not to be noticed. Cranes stood frozen over stacked containers, their rusted frames groaning softly when the wind pushed through them. At the far end of the longest pier, a low warehouse crouched close to the water, cooling units humming along its roof, pale vapor drifting into the dark like breath. Caleb parked 2 blocks away and went on foot. He kept to shadow, moving along rows of shipping crates, boots silent against damp concrete. Briggs stayed close, body low, tracking not only scent, but sound, the soft clink of metal, and the distant rumble of engines. As they reached the edge of the yard, Caleb saw headlights cut across the front of the warehouse, then disappear. A truck door slammed, voices carried briefly, urgent, sharp. He waited until the gate fell quiet, then slipped through a gap in the fence where bent wire left just enough room to pass. The side door of the warehouse stood ajar, cold air spilling out in a steady stream. Inside, the temperature dropped fast, breath turning faintly white. Rows of metal racks held sealed gray containers stacked in neat columns, identical to the ones Briggs had followed from Harbor Light. Labels had been peeled away, leaving only faint adhesive shadows behind. Briggs moved ahead, nose low, tail still. He stopped near a work table where papers lay scattered, corners curling from damp air. Caleb stepped closer and saw shipping manifests printed in thin black ink, routes marked, times logged, codes where company names should have been. He pulled out his phone and began photographing every page, working fast, steady, knowing minutes mattered now. From deeper inside the warehouse came the sound of liquid splashing. Caleb's pulse jumped. He motioned Briggs to stay and moved toward the noise, keeping to the edge of the racks. At the far end, 2 men were spreading fuel across the floor, their movements hurried, angry. One was young, slim, hair shaved close to his scalp, eyes darting every time a sound echoed. The other was older, thick through the chest, face tight with impatience. Neither looked like someone paid to clean up evidence. They looked like men who had been ordered to. "Hurry up," the older one muttered. "We don't have time for this." Caleb retreated before they could notice him, heart pounding, mind already shifting to escape. He returned to the work table and swept the remaining papers into his jacket, then scanned the nearest rack. Each container bore a stamped batch number burned into the plastic. He snapped photos of those too, moving from stack to stack, cataloging what he could. Briggs suddenly stiffened, ears snapping forward. A faint click echoed from the front of the building. Then the first spark hit the fuel. Flames rolled low and fast, racing across the floor, climbing the racks in hungry waves. Heat followed instantly, sharp and violent. Smoke thickened, stinging Caleb's eyes, burning his throat. He grabbed Briggs's harness and pulled him toward the side exit he had marked on the way in. They ran. Fire alarms screamed as the blaze swallowed the front of the warehouse, metal cracking, plastic popping as containers burst. Caleb kicked open the side door and stumbled into the night, lungs screaming, dragging Briggs through smoke that chased them into open air. Behind them, flames climbed the walls, painting the sky orange. They did not stop until they reached the cover of stacked containers several rows away. Caleb dropped to one knee, coughing hard, gripping Briggs's collar until the world steadied again. Sirens began to rise in the distance, too late to save anything inside. Caleb looked back at the burning building, knowing that everything he had not taken was already turning to ash. But he had enough. Across town, Marianne was awake when the news alert flashed across her phone. Warehouse fire at Silver Bay Port. No injuries reported. Investigation ongoing. She stared at the screen, heart pounding, then grabbed her jacket and keys. By the time she reached the edge of the port district, police cars blocked most access roads, lights washing blue across smoke drifting above the cranes. She found Caleb on a quiet side street, leaning against his car, face streaked with soot, eyes still sharp with adrenaline. Briggs sat beside him, chest rising fast, fur dusted with ash but unhurt. "They tried to erase it," Marianne said. "They almost did," Caleb replied, pulling out his phone and showing her the photos. Shipping routes, batch numbers, transfer times, enough to prove the warehouse had been part of the supply chain. Marianne exhaled slowly, relief and fear mixing in her chest. This is what Rachel needed. Caleb nodded. "It ties Harbor Light to off-site handling, and it shows they knew enough to destroy it." Fire crews rushed past them toward the pier, but neither of them moved. They both knew the story had already changed. Marianne looked at Briggs, crouching beside him and checking his pause. "You saved us again," she whispered. Briggs licked her hand once, calm, steady, as if this were simply another task completed. Caleb sent the files through secure channels, fingers moving fast, precise. When the confirmation came back, he finally let himself breathe. "They can't undo this," Marianne said. "They can try," Caleb answered, "but not quietly anymore." They stood together, watching smoke drift across the water, knowing that everything had shifted in those few burning minutes. Whatever protection the warehouse had offered was gone. Whatever story administration had planned to tell was now broken, and from this point forward, the truth would no longer stay in the dark. The change came without noise. 2 unmarked cars entered the service drive just after sunrise. No lights, no sirens. Doors opened, and people who looked like staff but moved like authority walked straight inside. Rachel Pierce led the group, jacket zipped, dark hair brushing her jaw, eyes already scanning corridors. Behind her, 3 agents split off toward administration and pharmacy without waiting for instructions. At the front desk, a young receptionist froze halfway through a greeting. "We need executive offices and pharmacy logs," Rachel said calmly. "Now." The call went through to the top floor. Grant Whitmore stepped out of his office minutes later, suit perfect, expression practiced. "This is highly inappropriate," he said. "You should contact legal." Rachel held up her badge. "We already did." Agents moved past him, sealing file rooms, unplugging terminals, photographing cabinets. Marcus Hale, close-cropped hair, eyes sharp and unsmiling, locked down the medication storage and ordered staff to step away. Grant's voice sharpened. "You are disrupting patient care," Marcus replied flatly. "So did you." Logan Whitmore appeared at the end of the corridor, anger already burning through his restraint. "What is going on?" he snapped. "You can't just walk in here." Rachel turned to him. "Yes, we can." An agent stepped between Logan and the pharmacy door. Grant reached for his phone. "I will call my attorney." Rachel nodded. "After we secure your records." Across town, an ambulance backed into a small private clinic listed in the transport logs. Paramedic Teresa Nguyen stepped out, lean, fast, eyes already on the patient chart in her hand. Inside, Walter Finch lay on a narrow bed, breathing shallow, skin pale. "Mr. Finch," Teresa said, kneeling beside him. "We're taking you to a public hospital. You're safe now." Walter tried to speak, voice thin. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Teresa said. "You were the one who told the truth." She moved fast, checking vitals, starting oxygen, signaling for transport. Minutes later, Walter was on a stretcher, rolling toward clean lights and open doors. Back at Harbor Light, medication cabinets were sealed. Servers were isolated. Staff whispered and stayed out of the way. A nurse named Tessa stood near the ward doors, hands clenched. They were changing records, she said to no one in particular. Marcus passed her, tagging another cabinet. Not anymore. Marianne's phone rang while she sat in her car across the street, watching agents move in and out of the building. "Your suspension is lifted," Rachel said. "Effective immediately. We need you back inside." Marianne did not hesitate. She hung up and walked. Inside, familiar faces turned toward her, relief breaking through shock. Tessa rushed forward and grabbed her arm. "They're arresting them," she whispered. "I know," Marianne said. "Let's check on the patients." In the executive corridor, Grant and Logan stood flanked by agents. Grant's voice had lost its smooth edge. "This is a misunderstanding," Rachel replied. "It's documentation." Marcus stepped forward and cuffed Grant first. Then Logan. No speeches, no shouting. Just metal closing around wrists that had never expected limits. Outside, cameras had started to gather, reporters pushing toward the doors, shouting questions. Grant said nothing. Logan kept his eyes down. Across the lot, Caleb stood beside his car, jacket still darkened by soot, Briggs steady at his side. He watched the unmarked cars pull away, then exhaled slowly. Marianne came to stand beside him. "They got him," she said. "And they got the files," Caleb answered. "Walter is alive. That's what matters." They did not smile. They did not need to. Inside, agents continued sealing rooms, tagging evidence, freezing access. Quiet justice moved through checklists and locked doors, not applause. Marianne returned to the ward and opened a fresh chart, hands steady again, voice calm as she spoke to the first patient of the day. Caleb clipped Briggs's leash and turned away from the building. No headlines yet, no celebrations, just doors finally opening. And this time, they would not be closed again. Change did not arrive with banners or speeches. It arrived with new badges, new schedules, and doors that no longer closed without reason. The nonprofit network took over Harbor Light within days. Audits continued, staff stayed, and routines restarted under quiet supervision. Evelyn Moore became the new director. She was tall, silver already threading through dark hair, eyes sharp but kind, the kind of leader who learned names before making plans. She walked the halls, sat with nurses, asked patients what had scared them most and what they wanted back first. Marianne returned to full duty without ceremony. She checked charts, supervised medication, rebuilt trust one shift at a time. Staff followed her lead, not because they were told to, but because they remembered who had stood up when it was hardest. Caleb did not leave. He told himself it was temporary, just until paperwork cleared. But every morning Briggs pulled toward the courtyard bench, tail steady, ears relaxed, drawn to the place where patients gathered after therapy. Evelyn noticed. "Would you consider staying?" she asked one afternoon, watching Briggs rest his head on a woman's knee as she laughed for the first time in weeks. "Not as security, as support." Caleb hesitated. "He's trained for protection." Evelyn replied, "He's better at comfort." They tried it once, then again. Patients came slowly at first. A man learning to walk after surgery held on to Briggs's harness while taking short steps. A woman with tremoring hands brushed his fur until her breathing steadied. A nurse sat nearby during breaks, saying nothing, just watching calm spread. No posters, no programs yet, just quiet repetition. Walter Finch returned on a clear morning, thinner but upright, walking beside Teresa Nguyen, who had come on her day off. Teresa was quick and confident, used to chaos, but today she smiled easily, hands resting in her jacket pockets. Walter saw Briggs and stopped. "There you are," he said softly. Briggs went to him without hesitation. Caleb watched as Walter rested both hands on the dog's head, eyes closing, breath evening out. "Feels like I made it through the storm," Walter said. Marianne stood nearby, arms folded, blinking faster than usual. From that day, more patients asked when the dog would be back. Evelyn moved quickly. Training approval, veterinary checks, liability coverage. Within a week, the therapy dog program was official. Caleb signed the papers without ceremony. Briggs passed every evaluation easily, calm in crowds, steady with sudden sounds, gentle with unsteady hands. The same discipline that once guarded hallways now guarded fragile moments. By the end of the month, Harbor Light felt different. Not perfect, but honest. Medication rooms stayed open to inspection. Records were double-checked. Staff spoke up faster. Fear no longer set the rules. Late one evening, Caleb and Marianne stood by the harbor rail, watching lights reflect on water. "You stayed," Marianne said. Caleb shrugged. Felt like the right place to stop running? Briggs lay between them, head on his paws, eyes half closed. Behind them, Walter walked slowly across the courtyard, unassisted for the first time, Briggs rising and matching his pace without pulling ahead. Marianne watched, then smiled. "You didn't just protect people here," Caleb said quietly. "He taught me how to help them." As the sky darkened, patients lingered longer than schedules required. Nurses slowed their steps. Conversations stayed outside after shifts ended. No alarms, no secrets, just water moving in and out, steady as breath. And this time, no one was afraid of the tide. If this story touched you, let it remind you that your choices matter more than you know. You may never see how far your kindness travels, but God sees it, and He weaves even the smallest good into something greater than we can imagine. Today, choose to be gentle where the world is hard. Choose to speak when silence would be easier. Choose to help when you are able, because someone near you may be praying for exactly that kind of help. If you believe that goodness still matters and that faith can move through simple acts, please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what moved you most. Subscribe so more stories like this can reach hearts that are tired and waiting for light. And if you believe that God is still working quietly among us, type Amen in the comments and let us pray together that He watches over you, protects your loved ones, and places the right people in your path when you need them most.